We've all been told the same story. If you're angry, let it out. Vent it. Scream into a pillow. Punch a wall. Rant to your friends. Because if you bottle it up, it will explode, right? But what if I told you that's not just wrong, it's dangerous? What if venting your anger isn't releasing it, but rehearsing it? What if the more you express your rage, the more it owns you? Let's start by zooming in on that common belief we've been taught, that expressing anger leads to emotional release. It feels logical. The body tightens when angry, the mind races, the chest burns, and letting it out feels like release. But now ask yourself this: after you vent, do you feel resolved or just temporarily relieved? And more importantly, does the anger return faster the next time? You already know the answer. You've experienced it, and science backs it up. Psychological studies going back decades have repeatedly shown that venting doesn't resolve anger, it reinforces it. When you express rage, you're not clearing it, you're rehearsing it. You're grooving that emotion deeper into your neurobiology. Like a song you keep playing until it becomes the soundtrack to your personality. You become someone who's not just angry in a moment, you become angry by default. So let's ask the deeper question: why does anger feel so necessary to express in the first place? The answer, as always, leads us inward to ego, to power, and ultimately to fear. See, anger is rarely a root emotion. It's a cover, a mask, a secondhand fire ignited by something we're unwilling or unable to face directly: hurt, rejection, powerlessness, shame. But admitting to those deeper wounds requires vulnerability. And for most of us, especially those taught that strength equals control, vulnerability feels like a threat. So we armor up. We express anger because expressing sadness or fear feels like exposure. But here's the philosophical trap. Every time you vent anger instead of examining it, you delay your own healing.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
You don't move through the pain. You circle around it in a cloud of heat and noise. And culturally, this problem is magnified. We live in a time where outrage is currency. We are rewarded for being offended, for shouting louder, for speaking our truth with zero reflection. But let me ask you something unsettling. Is it really your truth, or just your defense mechanism screaming for attention? Anger makes us feel powerful, but often it's a mask for how powerless we actually feel underneath. That's why people addicted to venting don't evolve. They escalate. They get louder, more aggressive, more righteous, but never more healed. Because healing isn't loud, it's quiet. It's subtle. It happens when the ego gets out of the way, not when it takes center stage. Let's go even deeper. The Stoic philosophers warned us about this thousands of years ago. Seneca wrote, "Anger, if not restrained, is frequently more hurtful to us than the injury that provokes it." Think about that. The anger you think is freeing you may actually be the very thing enslaving you. Every time you rehearse anger without reflection, you are strengthening the part of you that believes life must be battled to be survived, that people must be punished to restore balance, that the world is a threat that must be controlled. And so even when the conflict ends, you don't find peace. You find more vigilance, more enemies, more things to react to. Anger keeps you in a state of permanent readiness for war. You start to crave that surge, that righteousness. You build an identity around being the one who won't be messed with. But under that identity is a child who was hurt and never heard. This is where the real philosophical question emerges. Does venting anger return your power, or does it outsource it to your emotions? Because real power is not how forcefully you can explode. It's how deeply you can remain anchored in the storm. Power is not the punch, it's the restraint. It's the choice to feel the heat rise and not let it consume you. It's the quiet dignity of not needing revenge to feel whole. And that kind of power doesn't come from venting. It comes from processing. Processing is not suppressing. Let's be clear about that. Suppression is denial. It pushes anger into a corner until it mutates into depression, anxiety, or passive aggression. That's not strength. That's stagnation. Processing is entirely different. It's conscious. It's aware. It means turning toward the emotion and asking, why are you here? What are you protecting? What deeper wound are you guarding? This approach doesn't feel dramatic. It doesn't go viral, but it changes lives. It creates people who don't spread their pain, they alchemize it. People who don't need others to pay for their suffering, they transmute it into wisdom. That's rare. And that's why this truth feels so threatening. Because our culture thrives on unprocessed rage. Politicians use it, media exploits it, social media platforms feed on it. And we keep consuming it, thinking it's making us stronger. But it's not. It's making us more reactive, more fragile, more divided, and ultimately more controlled. So the real rebellion is not in venting. The real rebellion is in sitting with your anger without letting it narrate your reality. That's the path of mastery, not suppression, not explosion, but integration. And integration begins with stillness, with breath, with the willingness to admit that maybe your reaction isn't proof of your truth, but evidence of your pain. Let me ask you something almost no one dares to ask in the moment of rage. What would happen if you let the anger rise and did nothing? If you sat, breathed, listened, and let it pass through you without feeding it, expressing it, or explaining it away. Most people think they'd explode. But the truth is, they'd evolve. Because in that space, you meet a part of yourself that exists beyond reaction. The part that doesn't need to dominate, prove, or punish. The part that just is strong, clear, grounded. And that part, that's your true self. Not the angry voice. Not the vengeful shadow. The witness behind it all. And the more you practice listening to that witness, the less power your anger has over you. The less you need to vent. And the more you begin to understand, anger is not the enemy. It's the alarm. But if you keep mistaking the alarm for the fire, you'll spend your whole life screaming instead of healing. And when you allow yourself to fully enter that space, the one where the emotion swells and yet you do not act, do not lash out, do not perform, it changes you. Not in the way anger promises to change you by making you feel dominant for a few brief seconds, but in the way that real transformation always does, quietly, permanently, from the inside out. In that space, where venting would have once exploded outward, you begin to realize the weight of your own silence, the tension of it, the energy coiled within it. But instead of fearing it, you begin to respect it. Because it's in that stillness where you neither suppress nor explode that you gain access to something deeper than emotion. You gain access to awareness. And awareness is everything. It's the place where pain becomes perspective, where rage becomes insight, where reaction becomes response. This is not weakness. This is the highest form of strength, restraint that comes not from fear, but from clarity. Let's get brutally honest. How many times have you regretted something you said in anger? How many times did the cathartic explosion you thought would release you only add more weight to your heart afterward, more shame, more distance, more damage to clean up? And yet we keep calling this healthy expression. But what's healthy about giving your worst instincts the microphone and calling it authenticity? That's not truth. That's unchecked reaction. And unchecked reaction is the opposite of growth. It's emotional immaturity wearing the mask of empowerment. And this is why the strongest people you've ever met probably weren't the loudest ones. They were the ones who could hold pain without weaponizing it. The ones who could be in the fire of emotion and still choose not to burn everyone around them. These people didn't vent to get strong, they got strong by refusing to let their wounds become their identity. They understood that anger, unexamined, always seeks a target. And too often, that target becomes the people we love most. The friends who can't keep absorbing it. The partner who starts to fear your moods. The mirror that reflects back a face you barely recognize anymore. You begin to see that venting is not just an emotional decision, it's an ethical one. Because every time you unleash anger without reflection, you risk damaging someone else's peace in order to soothe your own chaos. And when you step back, you have to ask, is that strength, or is that simply self-indulgence disguised as power? This is why true strength lies in non-reaction. Not the cold kind, not the disconnected kind, but the deeply awake kind. The kind that feels everything and chooses not to become the thing it feels. This is what all the great traditions have tried to teach us. The Taoists call it wu-wei effortless action, calm responsiveness. The Stoics call it equanimity, unshakable balance. The Buddhists call it mindfulness, pure awareness, watching without attachment. It's not about being numb. It's about seeing clearly. Because when you see clearly, anger becomes data, not a directive. A signal, not a sentence. You ask, what is this anger trying to tell me? Instead of who do I need to blame? And here's where the transformation truly begins. Because when you stop venting and start listening, you realize most of your anger isn't even about now. It's old, ancient, conditioned, a reaction to something unresolved, a parent who never heard you, a betrayal that never healed, a sense of injustice you've carried in your bones for so long you forgot what it feels like not to flinch. Anger becomes a time machine, and venting it without understanding is like hitting replay on an old wound and expecting the bleeding to stop. But when you stay with it without indulging it, you begin to unwind it. You start seeing where it came from, what it's protecting, how it's kept you safe. And you begin the slow work of disarming it not by silencing it, but by respecting its origins and no longer letting it drive the car. Because here's the most profound realization: anger wants to be witnessed, not worshipped. It wants your attention, not your allegiance. When you give it your allegiance, it becomes your God. When you give it your attention, it becomes your teacher. And what does anger teach you once you actually listen? It teaches you where you feel powerless, where you feel unseen, where your boundaries have been broken. It teaches you about justice, about passion, about values. But only if you stop venting long enough to let it speak in its native language, which is silence, breath, memory, body. Not yelling, not smashing, not spiraling. That's why the moment you stop venting and start witnessing is the moment your life starts to shift. Your relationships get safer. Your nervous system starts to relax. Your voice becomes softer but more powerful. Because you're no longer fighting the world, you're integrating with it. You no longer walk around like a loaded gun. You walk like a grounded tree, deep roots, solid trunk, strong branches, and yes, storms will come, but you won't get uprooted by every trigger. You'll flex, you'll feel, but you won't fall apart. That's the kind of strength venting can never give you. So let me ask you a final question for this chapter of the journey. What would your life look like if, instead of expressing anger impulsively, you gave it space to express itself through you as wisdom? Who would you become if you stopped reacting and started reflecting? That answer is not abstract. It's not hypothetical. It's a future that starts now with your next breath, your next moment of pause, your next decision to observe instead of unleash. And in that pause, the self who has been hiding behind the anger, the self who longs for peace, for power, for purpose, that self finally gets a voice. And when you finally begin to live from that place where fire no longer dictates your movements, but instead fuels your awareness, you discover that anger isn't something to fear or suppress. It's raw energy. And like all energy, it's neutral until you give it a direction. This is the alchemy of fire, turning reaction into reflection, emotion into evolution, hurt into heat that forges something higher. Because anger doesn't have to be destruction. It can be transformation. But only when it's not vented recklessly, only when it's held with enough inner stillness to allow it to burn clean. Think about a blacksmith's forge. The same flame that can destroy a city can also be used to bend metal, craft tools, and shape weapons of precision. The difference is the presence of a master. Unattended, fire consumes. Attended with skill, it creates. And you are the blacksmith of your inner world. You are not the flame. You are the one who learns to work with it, to wield it, to honor it without obeying it. And that's what venting fails to do. It treats the fire like a god. It kneels at its altar, lets it speak through your mouth, act through your body, pour through your fists and your words, and then it leaves you in the wreckage, wondering why you feel hollow afterward. But when you choose not to vent, when you choose instead to sit with the heat until it reveals what's beneath it, you earn something that can't be taught by screaming or breaking something, self-mastery. And this is where things get beautifully uncomfortable, because most people don't actually want mastery. They want relief. They want to feel better now, even if it means paying a deeper price later. Venting offers that. It offers the illusion of control, the rush of dominance. But it always comes at a cost: relationships, trust, self-respect, energy, clarity. Self-mastery offers something different. It offers you. The version of yourself who doesn't get hijacked by every wave of emotion. The version who can stand in conflict without becoming cruel. The version who can acknowledge injustice without losing your balance. The version who can witness pain and not automatically turn it into blame. That version of you isn't born in a single moment. It's forged slowly, deliberately, in the exact moments where venting would feel easiest. And here's the twist: when you stop venting and start alchemizing, your anger becomes a messenger, not a master. You start to notice its patterns, its rhythm, its wisdom. You learn the difference between a reaction that's meant to be expressed and one that's just residue from past wounds. You begin to see how often your anger is about something old masquerading as something current. A look, a tone, a delay, a rejection, these things poke old injuries, and the anger that flares up isn't really about the present. It's about memory, about identity, about a younger version of you who wasn't allowed to feel safe, heard, or seen. And when you vent, you reinforce that wound. When you alchemize, you finally begin to heal it. That's why this work is sacred. Not because it's easy, but because it's liberating. Every time you hold back from venting and instead choose to breathe, to reflect, to pause and ask, what's really underneath this? You reclaim a little more of your power. Not the brittle kind of power that shouts and slams doors. The quiet, unshakable kind of power that can't be taken because it doesn't depend on anyone else's behavior. That power makes you magnetic. It makes you trustworthy. It makes you wise. And that's when everything starts to shift. Your relationships become deeper. People feel safer around you not because you're emotionless, but because your emotions don't control you. You stop attracting chaos and start inviting calm. You're no longer living at the mercy of your reactions, you're sculpting your life with conscious energy. And your anger? It doesn't disappear, but it becomes clear. It becomes focused. You learn to use it when it's needed, when there's a boundary to be drawn, a truth to be told, a fire to be lit in the name of justice or courage. But that anger isn't vented, it's channeled. And it lands differently. Because it comes from clarity, not chaos. So let me ask you something only you can answer honestly. When was the last time you felt your anger rise and instead of reacting, you just let it be there fully, silently, respectfully, and waited until it told you something deeper than rage? Most people never get there. They interrupt the process. They vent. They discharge. They waste the energy. But if you can wait, if you can be with the heat, it will speak. And what it says will surprise you. It may say you need to be braver. It may say you've been hurt and you haven't admitted it. It may say this is not about them, it's about you finally choosing not to betray yourself again. And in that moment, anger becomes sacred. It stops being poison and becomes fuel. And you become the one who's finally strong enough to carry it without burning down everything in your life to feel free. That's the real truth. That's the secret they don't teach in schools or shout on talk shows. That venting doesn't make you powerful, it makes you addicted to powerlessness disguised as volume. That true strength is not found in how loudly you roar, but in how deeply you can sit in silence and still burn with clarity. That the world doesn't need more outrage. It needs more people who can stand in fire and not flinch. People who can feel everything, but only act from what's true. You are that person. Not someday, right now. Every breath you don't waste on venting is a breath you invest in building the self you were always meant to be, calm, precise, courageous, clear. Now you know.